The saloon fell silent the moment Amelia Vale walked through the swinging doors, and not because she was beautiful, though she was, with auburn hair that caught the lamplight like copper wire and a figure that made grown men forget their manners. No, the silence came because everyone in Grass Valley, California knew about her affliction, and they watched with barely concealed fascination as her left eye drifted lazily toward the corner while her right eye remained fixed straight ahead. It was September 1878, and the mountain town had seen its share of oddities during the gold rush years, but Amelia Vale's wandering eye had become the subject of endless speculation and cruel humor among the miners and merchants who populated the dusty streets. She held her head high as she walked to the bar, her worn traveling dress speaking of hard miles and harder times, but her spine remained straight as a lodgepole pine. "Whiskey," she said to the bartender, her voice steady despite the stares burning into her back. Behind her, a group of miners erupted into snickers. "Hey, darling, which one of us are you looking at?" one called out, his words slurred with drink and meanness. "Maybe she's looking at both of us at once," another added, and the table dissolved into raucous laughter. Amelia's fingers tightened around the glass, but she didn't turn around. She had heard worse in Sacramento, in San Francisco, in every town between here and her childhood home in Missouri. Her condition had been with her since birth, a slight palsy of the muscles that controlled her left eye, and it had cost her more than just her dignity. It had cost her a teaching position, 3 marriage proposals, and countless opportunities that evaporated the moment people noticed the way her gaze seemed to wander independently of her will. "That's enough." The voice came from the corner of the saloon, deep as thunder rolling through a canyon, and it cut through the laughter like an axe through kindling. Amelia turned, both eyes trying to focus on the speaker, and what she saw made her breath catch. The man rising from his corner table was easily the largest human being she had ever encountered, not fat, but solid muscle packed onto a frame that must have stood 6.5 feet tall. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, held back from his face by a strip of leather, and his beard was neatly trimmed despite the obvious wildness about him. He wore buckskin and fur, and the knife at his belt looked substantial enough to fell a tree. "I said that's enough," he repeated, his dark eyes moving from Amelia to the miners with the slow, deliberate focus of a predator assessing prey. The miner who had spoken first bristled, emboldened by whiskey and the presence of his friends. "We don't mean no harm, Fletcher, just having a bit of fun with the cross-eyed girl." The mountain man, Fletcher, took 3 steps forward, and suddenly the saloon felt much smaller. "Her name is Miss Vale. You'll use it, or you'll find yourself taking a very long walk off a very short cliff." "You know her?" another miner asked, confusion replacing cruelty in his voice. Fletcher's eyes never left the group. "I know disrespect when I hear it. I know cowardice when I see men mock a woman for something she can't control. And I know that if I hear one more word about this lady's appearance, I'm going to start breaking jaws." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the piano player had stopped mid-song, his hands hovering over the keys. Amelia stared at her defender, her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone in the room could hear it. No one had ever stood up for her like this. Not her own father, who had looked away in shame whenever someone mentioned her eye. Not the men who had courted her briefly before making their excuses. Certainly not strangers in a saloon. The miners exchanged glances, weighing their pride against the very real threat standing before them. Fletcher Duncan's reputation had preceded him even here, 3 days' ride from his usual haunts in the higher elevations. He was known as a fair man, but a dangerous one, a trapper and guide who could survive winters that killed lesser men and track game across bare rock. He was not someone you crossed lightly. "We meant no disrespect," the first miner finally muttered, dropping his gaze to his boots. "Then you'll apologize to the lady." The miner's jaw worked silently for a moment before he turned toward Amelia. "My apologies, miss." His companions echoed the sentiment with varying degrees of sincerity, and Fletcher nodded once, sharply. "Good. Now get out." They went, filing past Amelia without meeting her eyes, wandering or otherwise. The saloon slowly came back to life, conversations resuming in hushed tones, the piano player picking up where he had left off. Fletcher returned to his corner table, settled back into his chair, and picked up his drink as if nothing had happened. Amelia stood frozen at the bar, her whiskey untouched. She should thank him, she knew that. But the words seemed to stick in her throat, tangled up with a dozen other emotions she couldn't quite name. Finally, she picked up her glass and crossed the room to his table. "May I sit?" she asked. Fletcher gestured to the empty chair across from him, and she lowered herself into it, very aware of how his presence seemed to fill the space around them. Up close, she could see the scars that crossed his knuckles, the weathering of his skin from years in the sun and wind, the surprising intelligence in those dark eyes. Thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." His voice was matter of fact, without a trace of self-congratulation. "No call for that kind of behavior. Most people don't see it that way. Most people think I'm fair game for mockery." She heard the bitterness creeping into her voice and hated it, but she was too tired to hide it. "I've come to expect it." "Then you've been around the wrong kind of people." Fletcher took a slow sip of his drink, studying her over the rim of his glass. "What brings you to Grass Valley, Miss Vale?" "How did you know my name?" "Heard them say it." He paused. "Actually heard it before that, too. You're the new seamstress at the general store, aren't you? Arrived on last week's stage. News travels fast in a small town. News about a beautiful woman travels faster." He said it simply, without artifice, as if he were commenting on the weather. Amelia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Beautiful. That's not a word most people use when they're describing me." "Then most people are fools." Fletcher set down his glass and leaned forward slightly, his eyes holding hers, both of hers, without any of the discomfort or pity she usually saw. "You've got good bone structure, nice coloring, a mouth that looks like it was made for smiling even though I haven't seen you do it yet. The fact that one of your eyes has a mind of its own doesn't change any of that. It changes everything." The words came out sharper than she intended. "It changes how people see me, how they treat me. It changes what opportunities I'm given, what life I'm allowed to have." "It changes how weak people see you," Fletcher corrected. "Strong people look deeper." "And which are you, Mr. Duncan? A strong person?" He smiled then, just a slight quirk of his lips beneath that beard. "I survive winters at 8,000 feet with nothing but what I can carry on my back. I've tracked wounded grizzlies through snowstorms and fought off mountain lions with my bare hands. But that's not why I'm strong. I'm strong because I learned a long time ago that what makes a person worth knowing has nothing to do with what they look like and everything to do with what they're made of inside." Amelia found herself smiling back, a real smile that felt foreign on her face after so many months of maintaining a neutral expression to ward off comments. "That's a nice philosophy, Mr. Duncan. But you'll forgive me if I'm skeptical. In my experience, even strong people have their limits when it comes to accepting difference. Then maybe you just haven't met the right strong person yet." He finished his drink and stood, and Amelia felt a sudden panic at the thought of him leaving. "I'm heading up into the high country tomorrow, but I'll be back in 3 weeks with furs to sell. If you're still in town, maybe you'd let me buy you a proper dinner." "Why?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "Why would you want to have dinner with me?" Fletcher looked down at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch again. "Because in the 5 minutes we've been talking, you've shown more spirit and honesty than most people show in a lifetime. Because you walked into this saloon with your head up despite knowing what you'd face. Because I'd like to know what made you tough enough to do that. And because, Miss Vale, I think your wandering eye is the least interesting thing about you." He touched the brim of his hat and walked out, leaving Amelia sitting alone at the table with her heart hammering and her mind racing. She watched him go, her wayward eye drifting toward the door even after he had passed through it, and for the first time in her life, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, that wandering eye might lead her somewhere worth going. The next 3 weeks passed with an excruciating slowness that Amelia had never experienced. She threw herself into her work at the general store, hemming trousers and mending shirts, creating dresses for the wives of prosperous miners and merchants. Her skill with the needle was undeniable, and Mrs. Patterson, who owned the store, had been happy to hire her despite her appearance. The older woman had a practical streak a mile wide and cared more about Amelia's ability to sew a straight seam than about which direction her eyes pointed. "You've been distracted all week," Mrs. Patterson observed one afternoon, watching Amelia unpick a hem she had sewn crooked for the 3rd time. "Not like you at all." "Just tired," Amelia lied, but the older woman's knowing look suggested she wasn't fooled. Wouldn't have anything to do with a certain mountain man who's due back in town any day now, would it? Amelia's needle slipped, pricking her finger. I don't know what you mean. Oh, honey. Mrs. Patterson's weathered face creased into a smile. The whole town knows Fletcher Duncan asked about you before he left. Asked me about you specifically. Wanted to know if you were courting anyone, if you were happy here, what your circumstances were. He did? Amelia's heart leaped despite her attempts to keep her expectations low. He did. And I told him you were a good girl, hard-working, honest, with no family to speak of after your parents passed. Told him you'd had a rough time of things, but you never complained. Mrs. Patterson reached over and patted Amelia's hand. That man looked at you like he'd found something precious in a creek bed. Don't sell yourself short. Mrs. Patterson, have you seen me? I'm not exactly the kind of woman men look at that way. Balderdash. The older woman's voice turned sharp. You're exactly the kind of woman the right man looks at that way. And Fletcher Duncan strikes me as the right kind of man. Rough around the edges, sure, but solid all the way through. His father was the same way. God rest his soul. You knew his father? Jacob Duncan? Everyone knew Jacob. Came to California during the rush in '49, decided he liked the mountains better than mining, married a Miwok woman who taught him how to really survive up there. Fletcher's got his father's size and his mother's knowledge of the land, lost them both to cholera 10 years back. Maurice. Patterson shook her head sadly. He was only 18, had to make his own way after that. From what I hear, he's done well for himself. Amelia absorbed this information, building a picture of Fletcher Duncan in her mind. A man who had lost his parents young, who had learned to survive alone, who had chosen the isolation of the mountains over the company of a town full of people who probably judged him for his mixed heritage. Maybe he understood what it was like to be seen as different, to be assessed and found wanting before you even opened your mouth. The bell above the shop door chimed, and Amelia looked up to see a young woman enter, perhaps 19 or 20, with golden hair and perfect blue eyes that tracked together in flawless symmetry. She was dressed in the latest fashion, her traveling suit clearly expensive, and she moved with the unconscious confidence of someone who had never been mocked for her appearance. Good afternoon, Mrs. Patterson said warmly. How can we help you? I'm looking for a seamstress. I need several dresses altered, and I was told this was the best place in town. The young woman's voice was sweet, cultured, with an accent that spoke of San Francisco, or perhaps even further east. This is Miss Vale, our seamstress, Mrs. Patterson said, gesturing to Amelia. She'll take excellent care of you. The young woman turned to Amelia, and her expression flickered just for a moment, a brief flash of surprise and something that might have been distaste before her manners reasserted themselves. How do you do? I'm Miss Charlotte Whitmore. My father and I have just arrived from San Francisco. He's bought the Silver Creek mine. A pleasure to meet you, Miss Whitmore. Amelia rose and reached for her measuring tape. All business. If you'll step behind the screen, we can take your measurements and discuss what you need. As Amelia worked, measuring and pinning, Charlotte chattered on about San Francisco society, the opera, the latest fashions from Paris. She was friendly enough, but Amelia could feel the young woman's gaze sliding away from her face whenever possible, could sense the discomfort beneath the polite conversation. It was a familiar dance, one Amelia had performed countless times. Will you be staying in Grass Valley long? Amelia asked, more out of professional courtesy than real interest. Oh yes, Father intends to make quite a success of the mine. We've taken the house on the hill, the one with the wraparound porch. It's quite rustic compared to what we're used to, but Father says it's important to be close to the business. Charlotte paused, then added with studied casualness, I understand there are some quite fascinating characters in these mountain towns, trappers and guides and such. I suppose so. I'm fairly new here myself. I heard the most interesting story at the hotel. Apparently there's a mountain man who comes to town regularly, an absolute savage by all accounts, but quite striking in a rough sort of way. Fletcher something? Amelia's hand stilled on the fabric she was pinning. Fletcher Duncan. Yes, that's the name. Have you met him? They say he's half Indian, lives up in the wilderness like an animal, but he's absolutely enormous and quite, well, masculine in appearance. Charlotte giggled. Not that I'm interested in that sort of man. Of course, Father would never permit it, but it does make the place more interesting than I expected. Mr. Duncan is a gentleman, Amelia said quietly, resuming her work with careful precision. I found him to be respectful and kind. Oh, you've met him then? How exciting. Was it terribly frightening? I imagine he's quite intimidating. He was not frightening at all. He was helpful when I needed help. Charlotte seemed to sense she had struck a nerve, and she changed the subject back to safer topics like sleeve lengths and hemlines. When the appointment was finished and Charlotte had left with a promise to return in a week for her first fitting, Mrs. Patterson emerged from the back room where she had been organizing inventory. That girl has her eye on Fletcher Duncan, the older woman said flatly. She said she wasn't interested. And I'm the Queen of England. I know that tone, that fake disinterest. She's heard about him and decided he'd be an amusing diversion, something exotic to tell her friends about back in San Francisco. Oh, I tamed a mountain man. That type. Amelia felt something cold settle in her stomach. Well, she's beautiful and young and from a wealthy family. If Mr. Duncan is interested in courting someone, I'm sure he could do much worse than Miss Whitmore. Mrs. Patterson snorted. Fletcher Duncan doesn't strike me as the type to be impressed by yellow curls and money, but I suppose we'll see, won't we? He should be back any day now. Fletcher arrived in town 2 days later, leading a pack horse loaded with furs and pulling a travois stacked with additional pelts. Amelia heard about it from Mrs. Patterson, who heard it from her husband, who saw Fletcher heading to the trading post to conduct his business. She tried to focus on her sewing, tried to tell herself that it didn't matter, that one conversation in a saloon didn't mean anything, that a man like Fletcher Duncan probably said nice things to women all the time and forgot about them the moment he rode out of town. But when the bell above the shop door chimed late that afternoon, and she looked up to see him filling the doorway, his hair still damp from what must have been a bath at the hotel, wearing clean clothes that somehow made him look even larger and more solid than he had in his traveling buckskins, her traitorous heart leaped in her chest. Miss Vale, he said, his deep voice making her name sound like something valuable. I was hoping you'd still be here. Mr. Duncan, she set down her sewing with hands that wanted to tremble. How was your trip? Successful, cold, long. He stepped into the shop, removing his hat. I spent most of it thinking about that dinner invitation, if the offer still stands. I'm not sure it does. The words came out before she could stop them, protective instinct overwhelming hope. I'm sure you've had time to reconsider. 3 weeks is a long time to think about whether you really want to be seen with someone like me. Fletcher's expression darkened. Someone like you? You mean someone intelligent and hard-working who has more courage in her little finger than most men have in their whole body? I mean someone with a wandering eye that makes people uncomfortable. Someone who will cause talk just by being seen in your company. Someone who is not like Miss Charlotte Whitmore. She hadn't meant to say the last part, but jealousy had loosened her tongue. Who the hell is Charlotte Whitmore? The beautiful young woman who arrived from San Francisco, whose father bought the Silver Creek mine, and who mentioned that she found you quite fascinating. Amelia lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with both of her eyes, wayward and true. She's perfect, Mr. Duncan, absolutely perfect, and I'm sure she would be thrilled to have dinner with you. Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, and Amelia braced herself for him to agree, to make his excuses, to do what every other man had eventually done and choose the easier path. Instead, he set his hat on the counter and moved closer, stopping just in front of her chair. Let me tell you something about perfect, he said, his voice low and intense. Perfect is boring. Perfect is a pretty picture that doesn't mean anything. Perfect is what people settle for when they don't have the courage to reach for something real. He crouched down so they were at eye level, and his dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. I don't want perfect, Amelia. I want you. Her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer. You don't know me. Then let me know you. Let me take you to dinner tonight and tomorrow night and every night until I have to go back to the high country. Let me prove that I meant what I said, that your wandering eye can wander right back to me for all I care, because it's not your eyes I'm interested in. It's what's behind them. Fletcher. His name felt strange and right on her tongue. People will talk. Let them talk. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused, warm, completely engulfing her smaller hand. I've been talked about my whole life. Half-breed, savage, mountain man. None of it matters unless you let it matter. The question is, do you want to have dinner with me? Not what anyone else thinks, not what makes sense, not what's proper. What do you want?" Amelia looked down at their joined hands, at the way his dark skin contrasted with her paler fingers, at the strength and gentleness in his grip. What did she want? She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that someone could look at her and see past the thing that made her different, see through to whatever it was he claimed to see. She wanted to believe that maybe, just this once, the story could have a different ending. "I want to have dinner with you," she said quietly. "I want that very much." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. 6 o'clock? Well, I'll pick you up at your boarding house. 6 o'clock, she agreed, and when he squeezed her hand before letting go and leaving the shop, she felt like she had just stepped off a cliff with no idea if she would fly or fall. Mrs. Patterson emerged from the back room the moment the door closed behind Fletcher, her eyes twinkling. "Well," she said, "that was quite something. You were listening. Every word. And that man is absolutely smitten with you, my dear. Smitten. He's probably just being kind. Amelia Vale, if you believe that, you're not nearly as smart as I thought you were. That man looks at you like you're water, and he's been crossing a desert." Mrs. Patterson shooed her toward the door. "Go home. Wash your hair. Wear the blue dress, the one with the lace collar, and for heaven's sake, let yourself believe that you deserve this." Amelia did as she was told, returning to her small room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house and preparing for the evening with a mixture of excitement and terror. The blue dress was her best, saved for special occasions that rarely came. She arranged her hair carefully, pinning it up in a style that was both fashionable and practical, and studied her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. Her wandering eye looked back at her, drifting lazily to the left while her right eye held steady. She had spent so many years hating that eye, cursing it, wishing she could somehow fix it or hide it or cut it out entirely. But Fletcher had looked at it without flinching, had called her beautiful despite it, or maybe even because of it, had seen something in her worth pursuing. "Let it wander right back to me," she whispered to her reflection, remembering his words. Maybe that's all any of them were doing, wandering through life hoping to find the place they belonged. Maybe her eye had just been wandering, searching, until it could find someone who didn't need it to be fixed. Fletcher arrived at precisely 6 o'clock, dressed in clean trousers and a white shirt that stretched across his massive shoulders. He had tied his long hair back, and without the distraction of travel-worn buckskins, he looked almost civilized, though no amount of grooming could hide the wildness that clung to him like mountain mist. "You look beautiful," he said when she opened the door, and the simple honesty in his voice made her believe him. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." He offered her his arm, and they walked together through the early evening streets toward the hotel restaurant. Amelia was acutely aware of the stares, the whispers, the way conversations stopped as they passed. But Fletcher walked with his head high and his pace steady, acknowledging greetings from the people he knew and ignoring the rest. The hotel restaurant was the finest dining establishment in Grass Valley, which meant it had tablecloths and real china instead of tin plates. The proprietor, a round man named Thompson, greeted them warmly and showed them to a table by the window. Amelia noticed Charlotte Whitmore, dining with an older man who must have been her father across the room. Noticed the way Charlotte's perfect blue eyes widened when she saw Fletcher. Noticed the slight pout that formed on her rosebud mouth when she realized who he was with. "You have an admirer," Amelia said quietly once they were seated. Fletcher glanced in Charlotte's direction and then back at Amelia with clear disinterest. "I have no idea who that is." "That's Miss Whitmore, the one I mentioned." "Huh." He picked up the menu. "Are you hungry? They do a good steak here, and the potatoes are usually decent." "That's it? Just, huh?" Fletcher set down the menu and leaned forward. "Amelia, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to hear it. I don't care about Miss Whitmore or any other woman in this town or any town. I care about you. I have thought about you every single day for 3 weeks. I have imagined this dinner approximately 600 times. I am not interested in anyone else, and I'm not going to be interested in anyone else, so you can stop watching that girl and start telling me about yourself." Amelia felt warmth flood through her, dissolving the cold knot of insecurity that had been building since Charlotte walked into the shop. I don't know what to tell you. My life hasn't been very interesting. Start with why you came to California, where you're from, what matters to you. So she did. Hesitantly at first, and then with growing confidence as Fletcher listened with complete attention, she told him about growing up in Missouri, about her mother who had died when she was 12, and her father who had loved her, but never quite knew what to do with a daughter who looked different. She told him about learning to sew from her aunt, about the teaching position she had almost gotten until the school board saw her, and decided that children would be distracted by her appearance. She told him about the men who had courted her, each one eventually making excuses and disappearing when they realized that being with her meant enduring comments and stares. My father passed a year ago, she said, pushing potatoes around her plate. I had nothing keeping me in Missouri, and I heard that the West was more accepting of people who were different. I thought maybe I could make a fresh start. And have you? I don't know yet. Mrs. Patterson has been kind, and I'm good at my work. But people still stare. People still say things. I thought maybe it would be different here, but people are people everywhere. Fletcher reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Not all people. Some people are cruel because they're small inside, because the only way they can feel big is by making someone else feel small. But some people see things differently. Some people look for the light instead of the shadows. And which are you? I'm the kind of person who spends months at a time alone in the mountains, because I find trees more honest than most humans. But every now and then, I meet someone who reminds me why it's worth coming back to civilization, someone who makes me want to be around people again. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Someone like you. They talked through dinner and dessert, through coffee and the gradual emptying of the restaurant. Fletcher told her about his childhood, about his father teaching him to trap and track, about his mother showing him which plants were medicine and which were poison, about the way the mountains felt like home in a way no town ever had. He told her about the loneliness that came with that life, the winters so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat, the strange relief of reaching town and remembering what it felt like to have a conversation. Don't you want more? Amelia asked. A house, a family, the things most people want? I want those things. I just haven't found the right person to want them with. Until maybe now. He said it simply, without embarrassment, and Amelia's breath caught. Fletcher, we barely know each other. I know, but I know enough to know I want to know more. I know enough to know that when I think about going back to my cabin, I want to imagine you there with me. I know enough to know that you're the first person I've met in 10 years who makes me think about changing my life. He paused, his dark eyes serious. I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight. I'm just asking you to let me keep seeing you. Let me court you properly. Let me show you that what I'm saying is true. I'm afraid, Amelia admitted. I'm afraid to believe you. I'm afraid you'll change your mind. I'm afraid that one day you'll wake up and realize that being with me isn't worth the trouble. And I'm afraid you'll decide that a mountain man with more scars than social graces isn't worth your time. I'm afraid you'll choose safety over adventure, town over wilderness. I'm afraid, but I'm here anyway. He squeezed her hand. Let's be afraid together and see what happens. Amelia looked at him, this enormous, gentle, fierce man who had walked into her life and changed everything. Let it wander right back to me, he had said, and here she was, wandering, her wayward eye drifting toward him even as her other eye held steady, both parts of her trying to see him clearly. All right, she said, let's be afraid together. Over the following days, Fletcher courted Amelia with a determination that left the whole town talking. He walked her home from work every evening, carrying her basket and listening to stories about her day. He took her on long walks through the pine forests surrounding Grass Valley, showing her animal tracks and teaching her the names of plants in both English and the Miwok language his mother had spoken. He bought her small gifts, practical things like a good knife for cutting fabric and a warm shawl for the cooling evenings, and the thoughtfulness behind each present touched her more than expensive jewelry ever could have. They went riding together on his day off, Fletcher providing a gentle mare and leading her up into the foothills where the aspen trees were just beginning to turn gold with the approaching autumn. They stopped by a stream for lunch, and Fletcher unpacked bread and cheese and apples from his saddlebags. This is beautiful, Amelia said, looking out over the valley spread below them, the town small as a toy village from this height. I can see why you love it up here. This is nothing. Wait until you see the real high country, the places above the tree line where it feels like you're standing on top of the world. He handed her an apple. Would you want to see that? If I took you there? I would. But Fletcher, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. His expression grew serious. Always. What happens when winter comes? You said you spend months in the mountains. What happens to us when you leave? Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the view. I've been thinking about that. This winter I could stay lower. I have a cabin about a day's ride from here, in a valley that doesn't get snowed in as badly. I could check my trap lines and still make it to town regularly. It would mean less profit, but I don't need much money to live on. I couldn't ask you to change your life for me. You're not asking, I'm offering. And I'm not just changing it for you, I'm changing it for us, for the possibility of an us. He turned to face her fully. Amelia, I need you to understand something. I've lived alone for a long time, and I've been content with that. But content isn't happy. Content is just getting by. You make me want more than just getting by. I want more too, she said softly. I've spent my whole life trying to make myself small, trying not to draw attention, trying to be invisible so people won't notice my eye and make comments. But you make me want to be visible. You make me feel like being seen isn't something to fear. Good, because I like seeing you, all of you. He reached up and very gently touched her face, his rough fingers tracing the line of her cheek, including this stubborn eye that likes to go its own way. Amelia leaned into his touch, overcome by the gentleness in such strong hands. The people in town think you're crazy for courting me. I heard the minister's wife talking to Mrs. Patterson. She said it was unseemly, that you could do so much better, that I was taking advantage of your, and I quote, savage nature and lack of understanding of proper society. Fletcher's jaw tightened. The minister's wife is a judgmental busybody who needs to mind her own business. She's probably right, though. You could do better. Stop. The word was gentle but firm. Stop letting other people tell you what you're worth. Stop believing that you're somehow less because one part of you works differently than everyone else's. You want to know what I see when I look at you? What? I see a woman who sews perfect stitches even though her depth perception is off. I see someone who walked into a hostile saloon with her head up. I see strength and grace and a stubborn determination to make your own way in a world that hasn't been kind to you. I see someone I respect and admire and want to know better. That's what I see, Amelia. Not your eye. You. She kissed him then, leaning forward and pressing her lips to his, tasting apple and honesty and hope. He responded immediately, his arms coming around her and pulling her close, and for a few perfect moments, the world consisted only of his mouth on hers, his strength surrounding her, his heart beating against her chest. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to marry you, he said. I know it's too soon to ask, I know we need more time, but I want you to know that's where this is heading for me. You can take all the time you need to decide if it's where you want to go too, but I'm already certain. How can you be certain? We've only known each other a few weeks. I'm 32 years old, Amelia. I've met a lot of people in those years. I know what I'm looking for, and I know it when I find it. But I also know that you need time to trust this, to trust me, to believe that I'm not going to change my mind or disappear. So I'll wait. I'll wait as long as you need. What if I need a long time? Then I'll wait a long time. He kissed her forehead, her nose, her mouth again softly. You're worth waiting for. They rode back to town as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Amelia's mind was racing, trying to process everything Fletcher had said, everything she was feeling. She had never been loved like this, with such certainty and patience. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. As they approached the edge of town, they encountered a rider coming from the opposite direction, a young man on a lathered horse who pulled up short when he saw Fletcher. Thank God, the rider gasped. I've been looking for you everywhere. It's the Jameson family up at their ranch in the High Valley. There was an early snow, came down hard and fast. The father went out to bring in the livestock and didn't come back. They sent their son down to find help, but he's just a kid, maybe 14. They need someone who knows the mountains, who can track in bad weather. Fletcher's expression shifted immediately, settling into the focused intensity of a man preparing for action. When did he go missing? Last night. The snow is still coming down up there, and it's getting dark. I'll go now. Fletcher turned to Amelia. I have to. I know. Go. She tried to keep the fear out of her voice. Be careful. Always am. He leaned down from his saddle and kissed her hard and quick. I'll be back as soon as I can. 2, maybe 3 days, depending on how long it takes to find him. Fletcher, the snow is exactly the kind of weather I'm good at surviving in. Don't worry about me. I've handled worse. He spurred his horse and was gone, galloping toward his camp to gather his gear, leaving Amelia sitting on her borrowed mare, watching him disappear. The young rider tipped his hat to her. Your fellow is brave, lucky too from what I hear. If anyone can bring Mr. Jameson home, it's Fletcher Duncan. I hope you're right, Amelia said, and she turned her horse toward town with a knot of worry forming in her stomach. 3 days passed with no word. The weather turned cold, and reports came down from the higher elevations of heavy snow and bitter winds. Amelia tried to focus on her work, tried not to imagine Fletcher lost in a blizzard or injured or worse, but her mind kept returning to him. She had just found him. She couldn't lose him now. On the 4th day, as she was closing the shop, Mrs. Patterson burst through the door. They're back! Fletcher and Mr. Jameson both, alive and mostly well. They just rode in. Amelia didn't remember running. She didn't remember dropping her sewing or pushing past Mrs. Patterson or tearing through the streets toward the edge of town where a small crowd had gathered. She only knew that suddenly she was there, and Fletcher was dismounting from his horse, exhaustion written in every line of his body, his face weathered and wind-burned, his clothes caked with snow and ice. He saw her, and his face transformed, tiredness giving way to joy. She launched herself at him, and he caught her easily, despite his exhaustion, lifting her off the ground and holding her tight. You're all right, she gasped against his neck. You're all right. I told you I would be. His voice was rough, worn from days in the cold, but his arms around her were strong and sure. I was so worried. 4 days, Fletcher, 4 days with no word. Took longer than I expected to track him. He'd fallen into a ravine, broken his leg, had to splint it, and then wait out the worst of the storm before we could travel. But he's alive, and his family is grateful, and I'm here. He set her down but kept his arms around her, looking into her face with an intensity that made her heart race. Amelia, the whole time I was up there, freezing and searching and wondering if we'd make it back, all I could think about was you, about how I'd found you, and I'd be damned if I was going to die before I got to see where this goes. Don't talk about dying. We all die eventually, but I'd like to live a good long life first, with you if you'll have me. He touched her wandering eye gently, reverently. I know I said I'd wait. I know it's too soon, but 4 days in a blizzard gives a man clarity. Marry me, Amelia. Not someday, not eventually. Marry me soon. Marry me as soon as we can arrange it. Around them, the crowd had gone silent, watching and listening. Amelia was aware of Mrs. Patterson's pleased expression, of Charlotte Whitmore's shocked face, of the minister's wife's disapproval, of all the people who had opinions about her life and her worth. But for the first time, she didn't care what any of them thought. Yes, she said clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Yes, I'll marry you, Fletcher Duncan. I'll marry you tomorrow if you want. He laughed, the sound booming and joyful, and swept her up again, spinning her around while the crowd erupted into cheers and applause. When he set her down and kissed her, right there in front of God and everyone, Amelia felt like she was flying. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church, with Mrs. Patterson standing up for Amelia and one of Fletcher's trapper friends serving as his witness. The minister's wife had tried to convince the minister not to perform the ceremony, citing concerns about propriety and the unsuitability of the match. But the minister himself had shut her down with a sharp reminder that all souls were equal in God's eyes. Amelia wore a new dress she had made herself, cream-colored with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Fletcher wore a suit he had borrowed, looking uncomfortable and magnificent in equal measure, his long hair neatly braided. When he said his vows, his deep voice filling the small church, Amelia felt tears stream down her face. "I promise to love you, Amelia Vale, every part of you, for as long as I live. I promise to be your partner, your protector, your friend. I promise to see you, truly see you, every day for the rest of our lives. I promise that your wandering eye can wander wherever it wants, because I know your heart is going to stay right here with me." "I promise to love you, Fletcher Duncan," she responded, her voice shaking but clear. "I promise to be brave enough to be loved by you, to believe in what we have, to build a life with you wherever that life takes us. I promise to trust you, to stand beside you, to choose you every day." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was sweet and long, and Amelia felt something settle inside her, a sense of rightness she had never experienced before. The town held a small reception in the hotel dining room, and nearly everyone attended, curiosity if not genuine goodwill bringing them out. Charlotte Whitmore appeared briefly, offering tight-lipped congratulations before sweeping out with her father in tow. But most people seemed genuinely happy for them, and several folks came up to tell Fletcher he was a lucky man. "Don't I know it?" he replied each time, his arm around Amelia's waist, his pride in her evident to everyone in the room. As the evening wound down, Fletcher leaned close and whispered in Amelia's ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Duncan?" The name sent a thrill through her. Mrs. Duncan. She was Mrs. Duncan now, married to this incredible man, starting a life she had never imagined possible. "Where is home?" "Tonight, the hotel. Tomorrow I thought we might start heading to the cabin. It's going to snow for real soon, and I want to get us settled before winter sets in. But it's up to you. We can stay in town if you prefer. I want to see your cabin. I want to see where we'll spend the winter. I want to start our life together." She looked up at him, her wayward eye drifting slightly, but her gaze full of love. "Take me home, Fletcher." They left the next morning on horseback, Amelia's few possessions packed on Fletcher's old pack horse, heading up into the mountains toward a future neither of them could fully predict. The ride took most of the day, climbing higher and higher until the air grew thin and crisp, until the pines gave way to high meadows already brown with approaching winter. Fletcher's cabin sat in a protected valley, sheltered by rock walls on three sides and facing south to catch what sun made it through the peaks. It was larger than Amelia had expected, solidly built of logs chinked with mud and moss, with a good stone chimney and real glass in the windows. "My father built it," Fletcher explained as he helped her dismount. "Back before he married my mother, he always meant it to be a family place, even when he was alone." Inside, the cabin was one large room with a sleeping loft above. There was a real stove, a table and chairs, shelves for supplies and furs covering the floor, and walls for warmth and comfort. It was rustic but well maintained, and Amelia could see the care that had gone into making it not just a shelter, but a home. "What do you think?" Fletcher asked, watching her reaction with obvious nervousness. "I think it's wonderful. I think we can be happy here. It's isolated. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. In deep winter, we might not see another person for months. Then we'll have to keep each other entertained." She turned to him with a smile that was both shy and bold. "I'm not afraid of isolation, Fletcher. Not with you." He crossed to her in 2 long strides, pulling her into his arms. "I love you, Amelia Duncan. I love your strength, your spirit, your stubborn refusal to let the world make you small. I love the way you look at me like I'm something special instead of something to be feared. I love everything about you." "I love you too," she whispered against his chest. "I didn't think I could. I didn't think I'd ever trust anyone enough. But you make me want to be brave. You make me believe that I'm worthy of being loved. You are worthy. You always have been. You just needed someone to see it." They made love for the first time that night in the sleeping loft, with the wind howling outside and the warmth of the stove rising to envelope them. Fletcher was gentle but passionate, treating her like something precious while also unleashing a desire that left them both breathless. Afterward, wrapped in furs with his arms around her, Amelia felt a completeness she had never known existed. "Tell me about the winter," she said, tracing patterns on his chest. "What will we do all day?" "I'll check my trap lines every few days, process the furs. You can sew or read. There are books on the shelf. We'll cook together, keep the fire going, watch the snow fall. It's quiet, Amelia, really quiet. Some people can't handle it. I've spent my whole life dealing with noise, with comments and stares and judgment. Quiet sounds like heaven. He kissed the top of her head. Then we'll be quiet together. The winter that followed was the happiest time of Amelia's life. The snow came early and deep, just as Fletcher had predicted, piling up outside the cabin in drifts that sometimes reached the windows. But inside, they were warm and safe and together. Fletcher taught her how to prepare furs, how to snowshoe, how to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of the animals. Amelia cooked meals that filled the cabin with good smells, sewed clothes and blankets and curtains for the windows, and discovered a talent for carving small figures from wood. They talked for hours, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Fletcher told her about his childhood, about the way his mixed heritage had made him an outsider in both his mother's world and his father's, about choosing the mountains because they didn't care what blood ran through his veins. Amelia told him about the loneliness of growing up different, about the small cruelties that had built up over years until she stopped believing she deserved kindness. "I used to pray my eye would fix itself," she admitted one night as they lay in bed listening to the wind. "I used to imagine waking up and having it be normal, having people look at me without that moment of shock or pity or disgust. And now? Now I think maybe it was searching, wandering around looking for something, looking for you, like it knew before I did where I needed to end up." Fletcher rolled to face her, his hand cupping her cheek. "I'm glad it found me. I'm glad every part of you found me. Even the stubborn parts? Especially the stubborn parts. I wouldn't want you any other way." Christmas came and went quietly, marked by a special meal and gifts they had made for each other. Fletcher carved her a beautiful box for her sewing supplies, every surface smooth and perfect. Amelia sewed him a new shirt, embroidered with subtle patterns that incorporated both Miwok designs his mother had used and motifs from her own Missouri childhood, a blending of their histories. As winter deepened, Amelia realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she waited to be sure before telling Fletcher. When she finally did, one morning over breakfast, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He went very still, his eyes widening, and then he was around the table and lifting her into his arms, spinning her carefully while laughing with pure joy. A baby," he kept saying. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy, Amelia? I don't have words. I'm beyond happy. I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful and yes, so incredibly happy." He set her down gently, immediately solicitous. "Are you all right? Do you need anything? Should you be sitting down?" She laughed at his instant overprotectiveness. "I'm fine. I'm healthy. But we should probably think about getting closer to town before the baby comes. I'll need help when the time arrives. We'll leave as soon as the snow melts enough to travel. I'll build us a house in Grass Valley, something solid and good. Our child is going to have the best life I can give them. Our child is going to have parents who love them and each other. That's the best life anyone can ask for." The snow finally began to melt in early April, and they made their way down to Grass Valley, where they were greeted with enthusiasm by Mrs. Patterson and the others who had befriended them. Fletcher bought a piece of land on the edge of town and began building a house with his own hands, working dawn to dusk to get it finished before the baby arrived. Amelia returned to her sewing, though Mrs. Patterson insisted she take it easier now. The other women of the town, seeing her obvious happiness and Fletcher's devotion, began to treat her differently. Not everyone, of course. The minister's wife still sniffed disapprovingly whenever they passed, and Charlotte Whitmore, still unmarried despite her beauty and wealth, could barely bring herself to acknowledge Amelia's existence. But enough people were kind that Amelia felt for the first time like she might actually belong somewhere. Their son was born in late August during a thunderstorm, his first cries mingling with the rumble of thunder. He was large and healthy, with his father's dark hair and his mother's light eyes, both of which tracked together perfectly. Fletcher held him with shaking hands, this enormous man rendered gentle and awed by the tiny life in his arms. "What should we name him?" Amelia asked from the bed, exhausted but glowing. "I was thinking, if you like the idea, maybe something from both our families. My father's middle name was James, and your father was William, right?" "Right. What about William James Duncan? We can call him Will." "Will Duncan. Amelia tested the name and smiled. I love it. Hello, Will. Welcome to the world, little one. Over the next 2 years, they built a life that exceeded anything Amelia had imagined possible. Their house became a real home, filled with Will's laughter and Fletcher's carpentry projects and Amelia's sewing. Fletcher continued to trap in the winter, but he stayed closer now, never gone more than a few days at a time. His furs were sought after, and he earned a good living that, combined with Amelia's sewing income, kept them comfortable if not wealthy. Will grew into a curious, active toddler who loved following his father around and asking endless questions. He showed no awareness that his mother was different from anyone else, and watching him look at her with uncomplicated love helped heal something deep inside Amelia that she hadn't known was still wounded. When Will was 2, Amelia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Fletcher was calmer, experienced enough not to panic, but still attentive and caring throughout her pregnancy. Their daughter was born in the spring, smaller than Will had been, but fierce from the start, with auburn hair like her mother and eyes that, like her brother's, tracked together perfectly. They named her Sarah Jane, and she completed their family in a way Amelia hadn't known it was incomplete. Watching Fletcher with both children, seeing his patience and love and the way he taught them about the world with gentleness and respect, she felt a gratitude so profound it sometimes brought her to tears. One evening, when Will was 5 and Sarah was 3, the whole family sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Will was chattering about something he had seen in town, and Sarah was playing with a doll Amelia had made her. Fletcher's arm was around Amelia's shoulders, and she leaned into his strength with the easy familiarity of years together. "Mama, why does one of your eyes look different?" Will asked suddenly, his childish directness cutting through the peaceful moment. Amelia tensed, old defensiveness rising automatically, but Fletcher's arm tightened around her in support. "What do you mean, son?" she asked carefully. "Sometimes one of your eyes looks at me and the other one looks somewhere else. How do you do that?" "It's just the way my eye is. It doesn't always point the same direction as the other one. It's been like that since I was born." "Oh." Will considered this gravely. "That's pretty special. None of my friends' mamas can do that." Amelia felt tears spring to her eyes. "You think it's special?" "Sure. You're special, Mama. Papa says so all the time," Sarah piped up. "Papa says Mama's eye was wandering until it found him. I don't know what that means, but it sounds nice." Amelia looked at Fletcher, who was watching her with an expression of tender love. "Your papa is a very smart man." "The smartest," Fletcher agreed solemnly, "because I was smart enough to see what was right in front of me, even when other people couldn't. I was smart enough to know that your mama was extraordinary, and I was lucky enough that she agreed to marry me." "Are you going to marry someone?" "Papa?" Will asked, confused. "He already married me, sweetheart," Amelia explained, laughing through her tears. "A long time ago, before you were born." "Can I marry Mama when I grow up?" Will asked. "No, son. You have to find your own special person. But you can use how I treat your mama as an example of how to treat whoever you end up with respect and love and appreciation for who they really are, not just what they look like." As the children lost interest and went back to their playing, Fletcher pulled Amelia closer. "You all right?" "More than all right. I never imagined this. When I was young and people were cruel, when I was convinced I'd never be loved, I never imagined I could have this. A family that sees me, children who think my difference is special instead of shameful, a husband who loves me exactly as I am. I do love you exactly as you are. I love you more every day if that's possible. You've given me everything, Amelia, a home, children, a reason to be more than just a man who hides in the mountains. You've made me better. You made me brave enough to believe I deserved to be loved. That's everything." They sat together as the sun disappeared behind the peaks, their children playing at their feet, their future stretching out before them, full of possibility. Grass Valley had changed over the years, growing and evolving, but Fletcher and Amelia's place in it had become secure. They were respected for their hard work, admired for their devotion to each other and their children, and accepted in a way that still sometimes surprised Amelia. Charlotte Whitmore had eventually married a banker from Sacramento and moved away, her dreams of taming a mountain man replaced with the reality of a conventional society marriage. The minister's wife had softened over the years, especially after Amelia had sewn her a dress for her daughter's wedding and refused to accept payment. Mrs. Patterson had become like family, a grandmother to Will and Sarah, a constant source of support and friendship. As the children grew older, Fletcher began teaching them the skills he had learned from his parents. He showed Will how to track and trap, how to read the forest and move through it silently. He taught Sarah the names of plants in 3 languages and let her help him cure furs. Amelia taught them both to sew and cook, to read and write, to think critically about the world around them. "We want them to have choices," she told Fletcher one night after the children were in bed. "We want them to know they can be whoever they want to be, do whatever they want to do. They'll have choices because they have parents who believe in them. They won't have to spend years trying to prove they're worthy of love and respect. They'll know it from the start. Because of you. Because you showed me what that looked like." Fletcher pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. "Because of us. We did this together, Amelia. We built this life together." Years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges but never shaking the foundation Fletcher and Amelia had built. Will grew into a young man who combined his father's size and strength with his mother's quick mind and careful attention to detail. He eventually became a guide like Fletcher, leading wealthy city folk into the mountains and keeping them safe while they pretended to be adventurers. Sarah developed a talent for illustration, drawing the plants and animals her father taught her about with such skill that a publisher in San Francisco wanted to commission a book. Fletcher's hair began to gray at the temples, and Amelia noticed lines forming around her eyes, but they aged together with grace, their love deepening rather than diminishing with time. They still made the trip to Fletcher's mountain cabin every winter, now taking the children with them, teaching them the peace and power of the wild places. One winter evening, when Will was 18 and Sarah 16, they all sat around the cabin fireplace while a blizzard raged outside. Will was sharpening his knife, Sarah was sketching, and Fletcher was working on a new carving while Amelia read aloud from a novel Mrs. Patterson had sent up with them. "Mama," Sarah said suddenly, setting down her pencil. "I was talking to Mrs. Chen's daughter in town, and she said some boys were teasing her about her accent. She's been practicing English so hard, but she still sounds different from everyone else." It made her cry. Amelia set down her book. "That's cruel. What did you say to her?" "I told her that being different is what makes people interesting. I told her about you, about how people used to be mean about your eye, but Papa saw past it and fell in love with the real you. I told her that the right people would see past her accent to who she really is." Sarah looked up at her mother. "Was that all right?" Amelia felt her throat tighten with emotion. "That was perfect, sweetheart. That was exactly right." "Is it true that people mocked you?" Will asked, looking up from his knife. "That they made fun of you because of your eye?" "Yes, a lot of people did. For many years." "That's stupid!" Will's voice was matter-of-fact. "Your eye doesn't change who you are. It doesn't make you less smart or less kind or less anything that matters." Fletcher looked at Amelia across the fire, his eyes shining with pride. "You hear that? We did good, love. We raised them right." "We did," Amelia agreed. "We really did." Later that night, after the children had gone up to the loft to sleep, Fletcher and Amelia stood by the window watching the snow fall in thick white curtains. His arms came around her from behind, and she leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Taking a chance on me, changing your life, building all of this?" "Not for 1 second, not for 1 heartbeat. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Amelia Duncan. You and those 2 amazing people we made together. This life we've built, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." "I used to think my wandering eye was a curse. I hated it so much, Fletcher. I hated the way it made me different, made me less in everyone's eyes. And now?" She turned in his arms to face him, looking up at the man who had changed everything. "Now I think maybe it was a gift. Maybe it was looking for you all along, searching until it found the one person who could see me for who I really am. Maybe it had to wander so it could eventually find its way home." Fletcher cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gentle on her cheeks. "Home," he repeated. "That's exactly what you are to me, Amelia. Home. Not this cabin, not the house in town, not any place. You. Wherever you are, that's where I belong. I love you, Fletcher Duncan. I love you more than words can say. I love you too. Always have, always will. Until the mountains crumble and the rivers run dry, I'll love you. They kissed as the snow fell outside, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a love strong enough to withstand mockery and doubt and the harshness of mountain winters. Amelia's wandering eye had led her exactly where she needed to be, to a man who saw past surfaces to substance, who loved her, not despite her differences, but because of everything she was. And in that moment, wrapped in Fletcher's arms with their children sleeping peacefully above them and their future stretching out bright and certain, Amelia knew that the wandering was over. She had found her place, her person, her home. Let others mock or question or fail to understand. It didn't matter. She had everything she needed right here. Outside, the blizzard continued to rage, but inside, all was warmth and peace and love. The wandering eye had found its destination at last, and it was more beautiful than anything Amelia had ever imagined. It was love, real and true and lasting. It was family, chosen and built with care. It was home, not a place, but a person, not a destination, but a journey taken together. And it was, in every way that mattered, absolutely perfect. The years continued their steady march, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that make up any life well lived. Will eventually married a girl from the next valley over, a tough, capable woman who could shoot as well as he could and who laughed at his jokes. They built their own house not far from Fletcher and Amelia's, and soon there were grandchildren running through both homes, keeping everyone young and busy. Sarah's book of botanical illustrations was published to great acclaim, and she began receiving commissions from universities and wealthy collectors. But she never moved away from Grass Valley, insisting that the mountains were her home and her inspiration. She eventually married a schoolteacher who had come west for his health, a gentleman who loved her fierceness and supported her ambitions. Fletcher and Amelia grew old together, their hair going white, their hands gnarled with the work of decades, but their love remaining as strong as ever. They still made the journey to the mountain cabin every winter, though now they went with less frequency and stayed for shorter periods. But the cabin remained their special place, the location of so many memories and so much happiness. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Fletcher surprised Amelia with a gift. He had commissioned a local artist to paint her portrait, and when she saw it, she gasped. The painting captured her perfectly, not hiding or minimizing her wandering eye, but instead making it part of her character, part of what made her uniquely beautiful. The artist had painted her smiling, confident, loved, exactly as Fletcher saw her. "Do you like it?" Fletcher asked anxiously. "I wanted to capture how I see you, how you really are." "It's beautiful. I'm Fletcher. I'm beautiful in this painting. You're beautiful in life, too. You always have been. I just wanted you to see yourself through my eyes for once." Amelia traced the frame with trembling fingers. "All those years ago when you stood up for me in that saloon, when you said you'd let my wandering eye wander right back to you, did you know? Did you know it would be like this? I knew I wanted it to be. I knew you were special. But this?" He gestured around at their home, at the sound of their grandchildren playing outside, at the life they had built. "This exceeded anything I could have imagined. You exceeded anything I could have imagined." They hung the portrait in their living room where everyone could see it, and it became a conversation piece. People would comment on how lifelike it was, how it captured Amelia's spirit. But what they rarely mentioned, what had become so normalized over the years that people barely noticed anymore, was the wandering eye. To the people of Grass Valley who had watched Fletcher and Amelia's love story unfold over decades, who had seen their children grow and their family flourish, the eye was just part of Amelia. It was as unremarkable as the color of her hair or the sound of her laugh. On their 25th anniversary, the whole town threw them a celebration. The saloon was decorated with ribbons and flowers, and someone had even hired a small orchestra from Sacramento. As Fletcher and Amelia danced, holding each other close while their children and grandchildren and friends looked on, Amelia felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered to Fletcher. For what?" "For seeing me. For loving me. For giving me a life I never thought I could have." Thank you for being brave enough to let me love you. Thank you for believing in us even when you were afraid. Thank you for giving me a family and a purpose and a reason to be grateful every single day." As they swayed together to the music, Amelia remembered that first night in the saloon, remembered Fletcher's voice cutting through the mockery, remembered the way he had looked at her with respect and interest, and something that would become love. She remembered being terrified and hopeful in equal measure, remembered making the choice to be brave, to take a chance on this massive, gentle, fierce man who saw her differently than anyone else ever had. "She's got a wandering eye," they had mocked, those men in the saloon so many years ago, using her difference as a weapon, trying to make her small. "Let it wander right back to me," Fletcher had replied, not with mockery but with invitation, with acceptance, with love. And it had. Her wandering eye had led her straight to him, to this life, to this moment. It had wandered through years of loneliness and pain until it found the one person who could see past it to the woman beneath. And then it had come home. The music swelled, and Fletcher spun her gently. Amelia laughed with pure joy. Around them, their family and friends celebrated, bearing witness to a love that had overcome obstacles and defied expectations. A love that had been built on respect and trust, and a fundamental belief in each other's worth. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Amelia found herself surrounded by people who loved her, accepted her, valued her. Her children came up to hug her, their faces showing the depth of their affection. Her grandchildren clamored for her attention, seeing only their beloved grandmother and not someone to be mocked or pitied. Mrs. Patterson, now elderly but still sharp as ever, squeezed her hand and said, "You've had a good life, my dear. You and that mountain man of yours." "The best life," Amelia agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." Later, when the party had wound down and Fletcher and Amelia were walking home through the quiet streets of Grass Valley, she stopped and looked up at the stars blazing overhead. Fletcher wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood there together in comfortable silence. "Do you remember that first night?" Amelia asked. "When you defended me in the saloon?" "I remember everything about that night. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I'd ever met, walking in there knowing what you'd face. I remember the way you held yourself, proud and strong. I remember deciding right then that I was going to get to know you, no matter what it took. I remember thinking you were crazy, that you'd change your mind once you really got to know me, once you realized what being with me would mean. And I remember proving you wrong." She could hear the smile in his voice. "Best thing I ever did, proving you wrong. You proved a lot of people wrong. Everyone who said we wouldn't last, that you could do better, that I was taking advantage of you. We proved them all wrong. We proved ourselves right. That's all that matters. We knew what we had, and we held on to it." They continued walking. Their steps matched after so many years together, their hands clasped tight. When they reached their house, the lights glowing warm and welcoming, Fletcher stopped her at the door. "I would do it all again," he said seriously. "Every moment, every choice, every challenge. I would do it all exactly the same because it led me here, to you, to this life we've built. You are my greatest adventure, Amelia Duncan. You are my home." "And you are mine," she replied, reaching up to cup his weathered face. "Thank you for letting my wandering eye wander right back to you." He kissed her then, tender and deep, a kiss that held all the years and all the love and all the promises kept. When they finally went inside, closing the door on the cool night air, they did so together, as they had done everything for the past 25 years. Together, as they would continue to do for however many years they had left. The house welcomed them with familiar comfort, filled with the accumulation of their shared life. Photographs on the walls, Fletcher's carvings on the shelves, Amelia's needlework on the furniture, evidence of their children's childhoods and their grandchildren's visits, books and trinkets and memories made tangible. In the bedroom, as they prepared for sleep, Amelia caught sight of herself in the mirror. She was 53 years old now, her face lined with age and experience, her hair more white than auburn. And there, just as it had always been, was her wandering eye, drifting slightly to the left while the other held steady. For so many years, that eye had been the source of pain and shame. It had marked her as different, as less, as someone to be mocked. But Fletcher had seen it differently. He had seen it as part of her, as something that made her unique rather than deficient. He had loved her not despite it, but including it, seeing the whole person and finding her worthy. "What are you thinking about?" Fletcher asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am, how blessed we are. Lucky is finding a gold nugget. What we have is so much more than luck. It's choice and commitment and love. It's two people deciding every single day to choose each other. Then I'm grateful. Grateful that you chose me, that you kept choosing me, that you made me believe I was worth choosing." Fletcher turned her to face him, his dark eyes holding hers with the same intensity they had held 25 years ago. "You were always worth choosing, Amelia. You just needed someone to see it clearly. I'm honored that I got to be that person. I'm honored that I get to spend my life loving you." They climbed into bed together, fitting against each other with the ease of long practice. Outside, the mountains stood silent and strong, those same mountains where Fletcher had learned to survive, where he had taken Amelia on their first winter together, where they had taught their children and now their grandchildren about resilience and beauty and the harsh grace of the wilderness. "Fletcher," Amelia said into the darkness. "Yes, love? If you could go back and change anything, would you?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Not one thing. Not one moment. Every joy and every sorrow led us here, made us who we are. I wouldn't risk changing any of it and losing what we have. Even the hard parts, the times when people were cruel, when things were difficult. Especially those parts. They tested us and we survived them together. They proved that what we have is real and strong and worth fighting for." He pulled her closer. "Why are you asking? Are you having regrets?" "No regrets. I'm overwhelmed sometimes by how different my life is from what I thought it would be. I thought I'd be alone, Fletcher. I thought my wandering eye meant I'd always be on the outside looking in, that I'd never have what other people had. Family, love, acceptance. And then you came along and changed everything. You changed everything for me too. Before you, I was content to be alone. I thought isolation was strength, that not needing anyone made me tough. But you showed me that real strength is letting yourself be vulnerable, letting someone in, building something with another person that's bigger and better than what you could build alone." Amelia felt tears slip down her cheeks, happy tears that spoke of a heart too full to contain all the emotion she felt. "I love you so much, more than I can say. I love you too, always have, always will, my wandering-eyed beauty who found her way home." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. The wandering was over, the searching complete. What remained was the living, the daily choice to love and be loved, the simple, profound gift of a life built together. In the morning, they would wake and begin another day, another chapter in their continuing story. Fletcher would make coffee while Amelia prepared breakfast, and they would sit at their table talking and planning like they had done for thousands of mornings before. Their grandchildren might visit, or they might spend the day working on projects, or they might simply sit together on the porch and watch the world go by. It didn't matter what they did, as long as they did it together. That was the real gift, the real miracle. Not that Amelia's eye had stopped wandering, it never had, but that Fletcher had never needed it to. He had loved her exactly as she was from the very beginning, and that love had made all the difference. The mockery had been proven meaningless. The predictions of failure had been wrong. What remained was simple, powerful, enduring. Two people who had chosen each other and kept choosing each other every single day. Two people who had built a life and a family and a legacy of love that would continue long after they were gone. As the stars wheeled overhead and the mountains stood their eternal watch, Fletcher and Amelia Duncan slept peacefully, their story a testament to the transformative power of acceptance and love. The wandering eye had found its home at last, and in finding it had helped build something beautiful that would endure for generations to come. And that, in the end, was more than just a happy ending. It was a life well lived, a love well earned, and a future bright with promise. It was everything that mattered, everything that would last long after the mockery was forgotten and the doubters were silenced. It was, quite simply, perfect.